There comes a moment, subtle yet unmistakable, when a person realizes that life has never been as chaotic as it appeared. The noise was internal, the turbulence imagined, the suffering negotiated. It is not a dramatic revelation. There is no thunder, no announcement. It arrives quietly, often late in the evening, when the mind is no longer performing. You notice that events themselves have always been neutral. What disturbed you was never the occurrence, but the interpretation. Never the world, but your private conversation with it. This is the moment the Stoics waited for. Not awakening in the mystical sense, but in the sober, intellectual one. The moment when illusion loosens its grip. Epictetus, born into servitude and denied almost every external freedom, understood something most free men never grasp: that sovereignty of the mind is not granted by circumstance, it is claimed through discipline. He observed that people surrender their inner life far too easily to praise, to insult, to fortune, to fear. And once surrendered, it is rarely recovered without effort. This work is about that effort, not about optimism, not about comfort, but about clarity. Because clarity, once attained, changes the texture of existence itself. You may live amid uncertainty, but you no longer belong to it. The Stoics did not promise happiness. They found the word imprecise, sentimental. They spoke instead of tranquility, of steadiness, of a mind that does not lurch with every external movement. And they believed this condition was not reserved for philosophers or monks, but available to anyone willing to assume responsibility for their inner world. The modern individual believes peace will arrive once conditions improve, once circumstances align, once recognition is secured, once life becomes predictable. The Stoic recognizes this as a fundamental error. Peace is not the reward of order. It is the result of understanding. Understanding what belongs to you and what never has. Epictetus began his teachings with a distinction so plain that it is often dismissed. Some things are within our power, others are not. Yet almost every human misery can be traced to the confusion of these two domains. Your opinions belong to you. Your judgments, your intentions, your actions. Your body, reputation, possessions, and the conduct of others do not. To live as though they do is to invite perpetual agitation. To accept the distinction is to begin the work of freedom. The Stoic does not withdraw from the world. He simply refuses to mistake it for himself. Let us begin then with the first principle: firm purpose. Without purpose, the mind becomes porous. Impressions enter unchallenged. Emotions dictate direction. Life feels invasive. Purpose, in the Stoic sense, is not ambition. It is not aspiration. It is orientation. Marcus Aurelius wrote not of dreams, but of duties. Not of becoming extraordinary, but of acting correctly. Purpose was ethical before it was personal. To reason clearly, to act justly, to endure with dignity, to contribute rather than consume. This was the work of a human being. A firm purpose provides gravity. It pulls the mind back to center when desire scatters it. Without it, every inconvenience feels personal, every delay offensive, every criticism destabilizing. The Stoic does not ask, "What do I want?" He asks, "What is required of me now?" This question simplifies life. It removes theatricality. It removes self-pity. It removes unnecessary drama. And with simplicity comes strength. A person anchored in purpose does not fear adversity. He recognizes it as material. Material for patience, material for courage, material for character. Epictetus insisted that no one stumbles into purpose. It is chosen, examined, reaffirmed. One must decide who one intends to be, irrespective of outcome. This decision is quiet, private, irrevocable. Once made, it renders many anxieties obsolete. Which leads naturally to the second principle, guarding the mind. The Stoics were ruthless observers of thought. They noticed that the mind, left unattended, does not seek truth. It seeks familiarity, drama, confirmation. Epictetus warned that impressions arrive unsolicited. They announce themselves with urgency. They demand assent. But an impression is not yet a belief. Between the two lies choice. Most people do not notice this interval. They accept the impression immediately. And in doing so, they surrender authorship. It is not things that disturb us, Epictetus observed, but our judgments about things. This is not metaphor, it is mechanics. An insult is sound. A loss is circumstance. A delay is time. Suffering is interpretation. To guard the mind is to slow the process, to examine impressions before granting them authority. Is this true? Is this necessary? Is this useful? If not, it is dismissed, not suppressed, dismissed. The Stoic does not wage war against thought. He subjects it to reason. This discipline transforms emotional life. Anger weakens. Anxiety loses coherence. Desire becomes negotiable, because emotions no longer rule unopposed. Seneca wrote that the mind should be treated as a republic, not a mob. Order requires vigilance. Freedom requires structure. Guarding the mind also means choosing what it consumes. Noise is not neutral. Repetition persuades. Exposure conditions. The Stoic is selective. He does not confuse awareness with absorption, nor information with wisdom. He understands that attention is finite, and therefore sacred. This discipline is not restrictive. It is liberating, because a guarded mind becomes spacious, clear, deliberate. From this clarity emerges the capacity to handle criticism, which brings us to the third principle. Criticism reveals dependency. Those who depend on approval are wounded by disapproval. Those who depend on reputation are shaken by rumor. The Stoic depends on neither. Epictetus taught that criticism has only two possible values. If true, it instructs. If false, it is irrelevant. In neither case is disturbance required. This perspective does not eliminate sensitivity, it eliminates fragility. The Stoic listens, reflects, adjusts if necessary, but he does not collapse, because his self-assessment is internal, his standards, self-imposed. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that opinions pass, reputations decay, memory fades. To suffer for what is transient is to misunderstand value. Handling criticism well is a sign of inner alignment. It demonstrates that identity is not outsourced, that worth is not negotiated. It is, in the Stoic sense, dignity, which prepares the ground for the transformation of offense. But here we pause, not to conclude, but to breathe, because the work ahead deepens. Offense is a curious phenomenon. It announces itself as an external act, yet takes root entirely within. It claims to be inflicted, yet requires consent. It presents itself as unavoidable, yet dissolves under examination. The Stoics regarded offense not as an injury, but as a misjudgment. Epictetus was unsparing in this assessment. If someone succeeds in provoking you, he argued, it is because you have allowed him jurisdiction over your inner life. This observation is unsettling because it deprives us of a familiar refuge, blame. But it also restores agency. To be offended is to interpret another's behavior as a verdict on one's worth. The Stoic refuses this transaction. He understands that people speak and act from their own condition of mind. Confusion produces confusion. Clarity, clarity. To receive an offense and not return it requires more than restraint. It requires perspective. Marcus Aurelius practiced this relentlessly. When confronted with insolence or ingratitude, he reminded himself that such behavior arose from ignorance, not malice. That those who act poorly do so believing themselves correct. This did not excuse the behavior, it contextualized it. Context is the enemy of outrage. Once you see the machinery behind offense, it loses its authority. What remains is choice. Respond if reason demands it. Remain silent if ego demands response. In either case, sovereignty is preserved. The transformation of offense is one of Stoicism's quiet triumphs. Not dramatic, not performative, but profound. Because it ends the cycle of reaction, and with it, exhaustion. From here, the Stoics turn their attention to fear. Fear, they observed, is not produced by danger, but by attachment. One fears only what one believes essential: status, security, belonging, control. Remove the belief in necessity, and fear loosens. Epictetus taught that the mind becomes enslaved the moment it confuses preference with requirement. You may prefer comfort, but you do not require it. You may prefer esteem, but you do not depend on it. This distinction is subtle, yet transformative. Fear thrives where dependency is unexamined. Expose the dependency, and fear collapses. The Stoics did not deny that pain exists. They denied that pain defines. Shame, in particular, fascinated them. They recognized shame as an emotion that survives long after its cause has vanished. It is sustained by memory, rumination, and imagination. Seneca warned that many punish themselves more harshly than any external judge ever would. Stoicism responds not with indulgence, but with mercy. Mistakes are acknowledged, lessons extracted, and then released. To cling to shame is to misunderstand time. The past no longer exists, only its image remains. And images, the Stoics insisted, do not command obedience. To overcome fear and shame is not to become fearless or shameless. It is to become proportionate, to see events in scale, to resist exaggeration, which prepares the mind for another essential practice: anticipating obstacles. At first glance, this appears dour. Why imagine difficulty before it arrives? Because surprise is destabilizing. The Stoics understood that expectation shapes emotional impact. What is anticipated rarely overwhelms. What is unexpected often does. Premeditation of adversity was not pessimism. It was rehearsal. Epictetus advised his students to consider, in advance, the possible frustrations of the day: delay, disagreement, loss, inconvenience, not to suffer twice, but to normalize. When difficulty arrives, it is recognized, not resented. Marcus Aurelius began his mornings by reminding himself that he would encounter arrogance, deceit, and ingratitude, not with bitterness, with preparedness. The mind that expects smooth passage reacts with indignation. The mind that expects resistance responds with composure. This practice cultivates resilience. It trains the mind to regard obstacles not as personal affronts, but as features of existence. A road without resistance does not build strength, nor does a life without friction. Anticipation removes shock. Shock is what converts difficulty into distress, which leads us to inner strength. Inner strength is not intensity, it is steadiness. It is revealed not in triumph, but in endurance, not in assertion, but in restraint. Epictetus distinguished between strength and hardness. Hardness fractures, strength adapts. Inner strength grows when one ceases to argue with reality. Reality does not require agreement, only recognition. Resistance consumes energy. Acceptance conserves it. This does not mean resignation. It means clarity. The Stoic accepts what is given in order to act effectively upon what remains. This is the difference between endurance and passivity. Inner strength is quiet because it has nothing to prove. It does not posture. It does not advertise. It simply remains. And remaining, under pressure, is rare. This quality transforms how one experiences loss. Loss is no longer a verdict. It is a condition. Pain is no longer an enemy. It is information. This perspective does not diminish emotion. It organizes it. From organization comes restraint. Restraint is the discipline of not acting immediately. In a culture that celebrates expression, restraint is often mistaken for repression. The Stoics knew better. To restrain action is to insert reason between impulse and behavior. Epictetus taught that the first impulse is not within our control. The second is. This distinction restores freedom. Anger may arise, but speech is optional. Desire may appear, but action is negotiable. The Stoic does not deny impulse, he governs it. Restraint improves relationships. Words spoken in haste cannot be recalled. Actions taken in passion echo long after emotion has faded. Restraint protects the future from the present. It also deepens dignity. One who can act, yet chooses not to, possesses authority. One who must act lacks it. This discipline extends beyond speech and conflict. It governs ambition, consumption, attention. The Stoic asks not, "Can I?" but "Should I?" This question alters behavior profoundly, which brings us to acceptance. Acceptance is often misunderstood as defeat. The Stoics understood it as alignment. To accept is not to approve, it is to cease futile resistance. Resistance to what cannot be changed is the purest form of suffering. Epictetus taught that events themselves are indifferent. What matters is our use of them. Acceptance clears the mind. It removes friction. It restores effectiveness. Once reality is accepted, effort becomes intelligent. One stops lamenting. One starts adjusting. Acceptance also moderates expectation. Much disappointment arises not from events, but from imagined alternatives. We grieve what never existed. Stoicism returns attention to what is present, not to diminish aspiration, but to ground it. Acceptance allows gratitude to emerge, not as sentiment, but as recognition. Recognition that much of what we value was never guaranteed, and gratitude, the Stoics believed, strengthens character. Which brings us toward the final horizon, living according to nature. To live according to nature is perhaps the most misunderstood of Stoic injunctions. It has nothing to do with retreating from society, nor with romantic notions of simplicity. It does not demand the abandonment of ambition, intellect, or refinement. It asks for something far more exacting: alignment. The Stoics understood nature not as wilderness, but as order, as reason, as structure. To live according to nature is to live in accordance with what a human being is designed to be: rational, social, capable of reflection, capable of restraint. When a person lives against this design, conflict arises, not externally, but internally. Confusion, restlessness, a sense of being at odds with oneself. Marcus Aurelius observed that when the mind resists its own nature, it becomes fragmented, pulled between appetite and conscience, between impulse and reflection. Harmony returns only when these elements are reconciled. This reconciliation does not require perfection, it requires honesty. The Stoic does not pretend to be beyond desire, he simply refuses to be governed by it. He does not deny emotion, he insists on proportion. Living according to nature also requires acceptance of impermanence. Everything changes. Reputation fades, bodies age, circumstances dissolve. To deny this is to live in perpetual disappointment. The Stoics did not mourn impermanence, they relied upon it. What cannot be preserved cannot be possessed, and what cannot be possessed cannot enslave. This understanding alters one's relationship with success and failure alike. Success is enjoyed without clinging. Failure is endured without collapse. Both are temporary. Neither defines. This perspective produces a quiet elegance of character. One becomes less reactive, less theatrical, more composed, not detached, but rooted in the only stable ground available: character. Character, for the Stoics, was not reputation. It was not moral display. It was the sum of repeated choices made under pressure. What you choose when no one is watching, when no reward is visible, when discomfort is guaranteed. These choices accumulate. They shape the inner posture with which one meets life. The Stoics believe that most people live with an internal contradiction. They desire peace, yet cultivate agitation. They desire freedom, yet chase dependence. Stoicism resolves this contradiction by narrowing focus. It asks, what is essential? What is superfluous? What is harmful? Much of modern life encourages excess of information, of stimulation, of comparison. The Stoic subtracts, not out of austerity, but out of precision. Simplicity to the Stoics was not poverty, it was clarity. A mind burdened with unnecessary desires cannot remain still. A life crowded with distractions cannot remain meaningful. Living according to nature involves deliberate reduction. Fewer attachments, fewer compulsions, fewer illusions. This reduction creates space. Space for reflection, for attention, for discernment. In this space, something rare becomes possible: presence. The Stoics were intensely present, not because they rejected the future, but because they understood its uncertainty. Not because they ignored the past, but because they understood its irreversibility. Presence was not a technique. It was a consequence of acceptance. One does not drift when one is grounded. This grounding extends to one's relationship with others. Stoicism does not promote isolation. It recognizes interdependence. Humans, the Stoics insisted, are not solitary creatures. We are designed to cooperate. Justice, therefore, is not an abstraction. It is a natural expression of our social nature. To live according to nature is to act with fairness, with restraint, with consideration. Not because society demands it, but because reason does. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that harming others ultimately harms oneself. Not mystically, but practically. Conflict disrupts order. Resentment corrodes clarity. Cruelty distorts character. The Stoic seeks harmony not through submission, but through understanding. He does not expect perfection from others. He expects consistency from himself. This expectation is not rigid, it is humane. Mistakes are inevitable. Correction is optional. The Stoic chooses correction. This brings us to mortality. The Stoics did not avoid the subject of death. They studied it, not morbidly, but methodically. Death, they believed, is the ultimate equalizer. It strips away illusion. It reveals priority. When one remembers mortality, trivial grievances lose urgency. Vanity loosens. Time sharpens. Memento mori was not a threat. It was an invitation to act now, to speak honestly, to live deliberately. A finite life demands intention. Without it, time dissipates. With it, even hardship acquires meaning. The Stoic does not seek to extend life at all costs. He seeks to deepen it. Depth, not duration, determines value. This perspective reshapes ambition. Ambition becomes internal, measured not by accumulation, but by refinement. Am I more patient, more discerning, more composed? These metrics do not fluctuate with fortune. They mature quietly. And this maturity produces freedom. Not freedom from difficulty, freedom from domination by difficulty. The Stoic is not untouched by life. He is simply not owned by it. This distinction is subtle, and everything depends upon it, because ownership implies identity, and Stoicism severs that bond. You experience events, but you are not them. You feel emotion, but you are not consumed by it. You participate in the world, but you are not reduced to it. This is the core of Stoic sovereignty, and sovereignty, once tasted, alters perspective permanently. The world remains unpredictable. People remain inconsistent. Outcomes remain uncertain. But you are no longer surprised. Surprise belongs to expectation. Expectation belongs to illusion. Clarity dispels both. At this point, something must be acknowledged. Stoicism is not easy. It demands vigilance, humility, self-examination. It offers no shortcuts, no spectacles, no guarantees. What it offers instead is reliability. You become someone you can depend upon in moments of pressure, of loss, of uncertainty. This reliability is rare, and it is magnetic. Others sense it. They trust it. Not because it is loud, but because it is stable. And stability is persuasive. As we approach the final movement of this work, one last principle remains. Not a rule, not a technique, but a posture. There is a posture the Stoics regarded as the final mark of maturity. Not confidence, not detachment, not serenity. Responsibility. Not the responsibility imposed by society, but the responsibility one assumes willingly. Responsibility for one's inner state, for one's judgments, for one's conduct. Epictetus insisted that freedom begins precisely where excuses end. As long as a person believes their peace depends on circumstances, they remain dependent. As long as they attribute their agitation to others, they remain reactive. The Stoic reverses this orientation. He does not ask who is to blame. He asks what is required of him now. This question is disarming. It leaves no room for resentment, no space for self-pity. It returns attention to agency. Agency is the Stoic's most prized possession. Not the ability to control events, but the capacity to choose response. This capacity, once recognized, transforms the texture of daily life. Inconveniences lose their sting. Delays lose their insult. Losses lose their drama. Not because they cease to matter, but because they cease to dominate. Dominance requires consent, and consent, the Stoic has withdrawn. This is the quiet triumph of Stoicism. It does not conquer the world. It renders conquest unnecessary. The Stoic stands within life, not above it, but he stands upright. He does not flee suffering. He refuses to dramatize it. He does not deny pleasure. He refuses to depend on it. This balance is delicate, and it must be maintained deliberately. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself repeatedly that the mind colors everything it touches, that clarity must be renewed daily, that negligence returns the soul to confusion. Stoicism is not a destination. It is a discipline, a daily return to principle, a continual refinement of judgment. This is why the Stoics emphasized practice over theory. Philosophy was not something to be admired, it was something to be used. If it did not alter how one faced insult, loss, fatigue, or temptation, it was considered ornamental. True Stoicism is visible only under pressure. When you pause instead of reacting, when you choose restraint instead of indulgence, when you accept instead of resist. These moments are unremarkable, and that is precisely their virtue. They accumulate silently. They reshape character invisibly until one day, without ceremony, you notice that life no longer unsettles you as it once did. Not because it has become kinder, but because you have become clearer. This clarity extends to ambition. The Stoic does not abandon ambition, he redefines it. Success is no longer measured by acquisition, but by coherence. Do your actions align with your values? Does your conduct reflect your principles? Does your inner life contradict your outer one? When alignment is achieved, something profound occurs. Inner friction diminishes, decisions simplify, regret loses its hold. Life does not become easy, but it becomes intelligible, and intelligibility reduces fear. Fear thrives in confusion, in ambiguity, in contradiction. Clarity dissolves it. This is why Stoicism produces calm without complacency. The Stoic remains engaged. He participates fully, but he does so without illusion. He knows that outcomes are uncertain, that effort does not guarantee reward, that justice is not always immediate. And yet he acts, because action is his responsibility, outcome is not. This distinction frees him from bitterness. He does not feel cheated by life. He does not feel entitled to comfort. He understands that existence is not a contract. It is a condition. And within that condition, one may live nobly or poorly. The Stoic chooses nobility, not as performance, but as posture. This posture expresses itself in small ways, in how one speaks, in how one listens, in how one endures. The Stoic does not rush to be understood. He does not rush to be admired. He prefers to be consistent. Consistency, the Stoics believed, was the truest form of integrity. To be the same person in private as in public, under ease and under strain. This consistency creates trust, not because it is impressive, but because it is reliable. And reliability is rare. As this work draws to a close, it is worth returning to the beginning. Nothing outside you has ever possessed the power you attributed to it. Events did not wound you. Interpretations did. People did not destabilize you. Expectations did. Circumstances did not imprison you. Attachments did. This recognition is not meant to shame. It is meant to liberate. Because what was once given away can be reclaimed. Not all at once, not without effort, but steadily. Stoicism does not promise transformation overnight. It promises orientation, a way of standing in the world, a way of thinking that does not collapse under pressure, a way of living that does not depend on fortune's favor. Once adopted, it alters your relationship with time. You become less hurried, less anxious, more deliberate. You stop asking life to justify itself. You begin justifying your actions instead. This reversal is subtle and profound. If you have remained with this reflection until now, it suggests a certain disposition, a willingness to think beyond comfort, a resistance to superficial answers, an appetite for coherence. Such dispositions are uncommon, and they deserve cultivation. If this work has sharpened your perception even slightly, allow it to continue its work beyond this moment. Not by agreement, but by application. Choose one principle, one restraint, one correction, and practice it. Quietly, consistently, without announcement. That is how philosophy becomes lived. If you wish to remain engaged in this exploration, consider continuing the dialogue, not as a gesture, but as a commitment to depth. A thoughtful response is not noise, it is participation. A shared reflection is not promotion, it is recognition. And if there is one person whose mind would meet this material with seriousness, invite them into the conversation, not to persuade, but to reflect together. That, more than any metric, honors the work behind these ideas. Stoicism has endured because it does not flatter, it does not entertain, it instructs. And instruction, when accepted, produces freedom. Not the freedom of escape, but the freedom of sovereignty. The freedom to remain composed in a world that is not. That is the Stoic inheritance, and it is now yours to practice.